The disappearance on Hollow Creek Road. The first story takes place in a small, sleepy town tucked between two ridges of forest. Hollow Creek Road was one of those rural backroads locals only used if they had to. It was narrow, cracked from years of neglect, and littered with overgrown weeds that pressed against the pavement like nature was trying to swallow it back whole. Most of the houses along it were abandoned, wooden shells with sagging porches and boards nailed over windows. But one family, the Millers, had lived there for generations. Their home sat at the very end of the road, a two-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and a sagging roof. Despite its appearance, the family had insisted the place carried history and pride. That was until their teenage son, Jason Miller, vanished one night walking home from his friend's house. The night Jason disappeared wasn't particularly unusual at first. His best friend, Tyler, said they had been hanging out, playing video games and trading stories about the local legends. Tales of shadowy figures seen along Hollow Creek Road, whispers of the watcher in the woods, and the claim that no dog ever barked past the Miller property. Tyler's mom dropped Jason off near the beginning of the road around 9:30 p.m. because Jason insisted on walking the rest of the way himself. It was only a 15-minute trek, and he'd done it dozens of times. But according to his parents, Jason never made it home. The next morning, his backpack was found in the ditch about halfway down the road, the zipper half open, and one of his shoes lying several feet away. The town launched a massive search. Volunteers combed the woods, police set up roadblocks, and dogs were brought in. But what unsettled everyone was how quickly the scent trails went cold. The dogs would lead searchers a few hundred feet down the road, then freeze, whine, and refuse to continue. The air felt wrong there, several volunteers later recalled. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, heavy, as though every sound was being muffled by something unseen. One woman described it as like walking underwater. Despite weeks of searching, Jason was never found. His case remains open to this day, but it has since become one of the town's darkest legends, whispered in hushed tones whenever the road's name is mentioned. What gives the story its enduring horror is what Tyler later confessed, years after the search had gone cold. He admitted that while Jason had been joking about the legends earlier that night, he wasn't entirely laughing. Tyler claimed Jason seemed distracted, like he was listening to something outside the window during their game session. When pressed, Jason told him, "It's nothing, just feels like something's been following me home lately." Tyler brushed it off, but the memory has haunted him ever since. Some locals say this explains why Jason wanted to walk alone, to prove to himself that he wasn't being followed. Others whisper he was lured to this day. Hollow Creek Road remains avoided after dark. Drivers claim their headlights dim when passing Jason's last known spot. Some report seeing a figure in the trees, just at the edge of vision, tall, unmoving, and watching. Others claim that on quiet nights, you can hear footsteps running just behind your car if you drive with the windows down. The Miller family eventually left town, their house left to rot with the rest along that forsaken road. The boarded-up windows still stand, a grim reminder that Jason Miller's walk home was the last anyone ever saw of him. And the road? Locals say it doesn't just take people, it keeps them. The vanishing roommate in 2013, a college student named Emily, shared a small off-campus apartment with her best friend, Claire. They had been inseparable since freshman year, studying together, going to parties, and even working part-time jobs at the same cafe. Their apartment wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, a shared bathroom, and a tiny kitchen that always smelled faintly of burnt toast. Still, it was their safe haven, the place where laughter often filled the walls late into the night. That's why what happened one Friday evening unsettled not just their families, but the entire campus community. That night, Emily returned from her evening shift at the cafe around 10:45 p.m. She remembered unlocking the apartment door and hearing the faint hum of music playing in Claire's bedroom. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from her phone or laptop. Relieved that her roommate was home, Emily went straight to the bathroom to shower before bed. When she finished, she noticed the apartment was oddly quiet. The music had stopped. Thinking Claire had gone to bed, Emily peeked into her room to say goodnight. What she found made her skin crawl. The room was empty. Lights on, laptop still open on the desk, earbuds resting on the bed. Claire's purse sat on the chair, her phone charging by the nightstand, and even her shoes neatly by the door. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment, only she never returned. Emily panicked. She searched the entire apartment, then the hallway, then the street outside. There was no sign of Claire. She called her phone repeatedly, only to hear it buzzing on the nightstand. Even stranger, when Emily opened the laptop, the music playlist was paused mid-song, as if someone had stopped it abruptly. The police were called within the hour, and they questioned Emily for hours, pressing her on every detail. But no evidence surfaced of forced entry, no signs of struggle, and no indication Claire had left on her own. The building's security cameras showed her entering around 9:15 p.m., carrying groceries. They never showed her leaving. Rumors spread quickly across campus. Some believed Claire had been targeted by a stalker, while others whispered about the building's history. Years before, an elderly man had been found dead in one of the apartments, his body left undiscovered for weeks. Students joked the place was cursed, but after Claire's disappearance, the jokes stopped. Residents began reporting unsettling occurrences, footsteps echoing in the hall when no one was around, faucets turning on by themselves, and a woman's faint voice calling their names in the middle of the night. Several tenants moved out within weeks, unable to shake the dread that hung in the building's walls. Emily never recovered from that night. She dropped out of school a semester later, claiming she could no longer sleep in any apartment without waking in terror. In interviews, she insisted she sometimes hears Claire's voice when she's alone, whispering just behind her ear. Police still classify Claire's case as a missing person, but locals say something else, that Claire didn't leave the building at all. Some believe she was taken, not by a person, but by whatever lingers in that apartment. Even now, the unit remains empty, untouched, as if waiting for its lost tenant to return. The man in the photograph Daniel sat frozen at the security desk, the folder spread open before him. His eyes kept drifting back to the blurred face in the black and white photograph. The typewritten line beneath it felt heavier than any words he had ever read. Status: deceased, found on premises, 10th floor. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. No one had mentioned this in his training. No one had ever said that a man had died in the building. Suddenly, the reflection, the slamming door, the cold air, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping together. He flipped through the other documents in the folder, hoping for more clarity. Most of the records were routine, hire dates, job titles, employee IDs. But this man's file was thinner, almost intentionally so. The only personal detail was a name, printed in bold block letters at the top of the first page: Edward Mallory. Daniel whispered it under his breath, testing the weight of it. It sent an odd shiver through him, as though the building itself reacted to the sound. The lobby lights above him flickered once, then steadied. He closed the folder quickly, his instincts telling him he had uncovered something he wasn't meant to. Daniel's eyes darted back to the monitor showing the 10th floor feed. His stomach lurched. The office door was now wide open, the interior pitch black. And there, standing in the threshold, was a tall, distorted silhouette. Not quite a shadow, not quite a man, its edges blurred, as though the camera couldn't focus on it properly. It didn't move, didn't pace or shift. It simply stood there, facing directly toward the camera. Daniel's hand hovered over the desk phone, ready to call someone, anyone, but his fingers froze. Who would he call? Who would believe him at this hour? Then came the sound. A deep, dragging noise, like heavy furniture scraping across the floor above him. Daniel flinched, every muscle in his body tightening. He grabbed his flashlight and rose from the desk, unwilling but compelled to see for himself. His boots echoed against the marble lobby floor as he made his way to the stairwell again. This time, the silence inside the stairwell was suffocating. Each floor he passed seemed darker than the last, the fluorescent bulbs dimming as though something was following his ascent. When he reached the 10th floor landing, he paused, heart pounding in his chest. The air seeping through the door was freezing, unnatural. With a shaky hand, he pushed the stairwell door open. The hallway was wrong. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing so loud it sounded like hornets trapped in the ceiling. And at the end of the hallway, the office door stood open like a gaping mouth. Daniel raised his flashlight. For a fraction of a second, it caught something inside the office. A man in a suit, standing unnaturally still, head tilted sharply to one side, face obscured in shadow. But then, as the light trembled in his hand, The figure seemed to dissolve into the darkness, leaving only the sound of a soft, deliberate whisper that drifted down the hallway. Mallory. The phone that kept ringing in 1996. A small family in rural Ohio began receiving late-night phone calls that would change their lives forever. The calls started innocently, wrong numbers, static-filled lines, and silence on the other end. At first, they dismissed it as a prank or a glitch in the phone lines. But soon, the calls grew frequent, always between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m. The phone would ring, the family would answer, and the silence would stretch unbearably before a faint breathing sound emerged. No words, just slow, deliberate breathing. The father, Mark, grew angry and contacted the phone company. They traced the calls, but what they reported left the family shaken. Every trace led back to their own home phone. Somehow, the calls were originating from inside the house. The company dismissed it as a technical error, but the timing and consistency made it harder to believe. The family began unplugging the phone at night. Yet when they checked the answering machine in the morning, they would find new recordings, static, faint breathing, and sometimes the softest whisper of their own names. One night, Mark stayed awake to confront whoever was behind it. At 2:12 a.m., the phone rang. He snatched the receiver and shouted, demanding answers. For the first time, the silence broke, not with breathing, but with a faint voice repeating, "I'm already inside." Mark tore through the house, checking every room, attic, and basement. He found nothing. His wife and children begged him to call the police, but by the time officers arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. The calls continued, almost tauntingly, as if whoever was behind them knew the family's every move. The family finally fled after the most disturbing incident. One morning, they woke to find the phone off the hook in the kitchen. On the counter beside it was a small cassette tape, something none of them owned. When Mark played it, the tape contained hours of recordings of them. Conversations at dinner, arguments, laughter, even the sound of their youngest child sleeping. Someone had been inside, listening, documenting their lives without their knowledge. Terrified, they left the house that very day, never returning. The property was later abandoned, left to decay, and the mystery of the caller was never solved to this day. Neighbors claim they still hear a phone ringing inside the empty house, long disconnected from any service. Some say if you stand close enough to the broken windows at night, you can hear the faint sound of breathing on the other side, waiting for someone to answer. Whether it was a deranged intruder or something unexplainable, the truth remains buried within those walls. And the question lingers, if your phone rang in the dead of night, would you answer? The babysitter's window. In 2001, a high school senior named Rachel took on a routine babysitting job in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The Johnsons, a young couple, asked her to watch their two children while they attended a late dinner party across town. It was supposed to be an easy night. Put the kids to bed, watch TV, and go home. The Johnsons' house was warm and welcoming, decorated with family photos and toys scattered across the living room. Rachel had babysat there before, and nothing had ever seemed out of place. But on this night, she felt something different as soon as she walked in. After putting the kids to bed around 9 p.m., Rachel settled into the living room with her homework. The house was quiet, aside from the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of pipes. Around 10:30, she heard it, a faint tapping noise against the large window behind the couch. She froze, her pen hovering over the notebook. At first, she thought it was just a branch brushing against the glass. But when she looked up, her heart stopped. In the reflection of the dark window, she swore she saw the outline of a face staring in. She whipped around, but there was nothing outside, just the yard bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlight. Nervously, she pulled the curtains shut, trying to shake it off. But the tapping came again, louder this time, like fingernails against the glass. Rachel's pulse quickened. She checked the locks on the doors, then tiptoed upstairs to peek in on the kids. Both were sound asleep, undisturbed. Returning downstairs, she grabbed the house phone to call the Johnsons, but before she could dial, the phone rang. Startled, she answered, only to hear heavy breathing on the other end before the line clicked dead. Rachel nearly left the house right then, but her sense of responsibility kept her there. Minutes later, the tapping returned, only this time it came from the kitchen window. She crept toward it slowly, clutching a flashlight she'd found in the drawer. When she shined the beam, the light fell on the glass, revealing a handprint. Not pressed from the outside, but smeared from the inside. The realization chilled her to the bone. Whoever was in the house hadn't been outside the windows. They'd been watching her from within. When the Johnsons returned, they found Rachel pale and shaking, clutching the children in the upstairs hallway. Police were called, and a search of the house was conducted. Behind a false wall panel in the basement, they found a crawl space and evidence that someone had been living there. Old blankets, food wrappers, and a stack of Polaroid photos showing the Johnson family sleeping in their beds. Though the intruder was never caught, the photos proved one thing. The stranger had been inside the home for weeks, watching, waiting. Rachel never babysat again after that night. The woman on the stairs. In 1984, a young couple named Daniel and Laura rented a small townhouse in Pennsylvania. It wasn't anything special. 2 bedrooms, a narrow staircase, and a basement that always smelled faintly of damp earth. The rent was cheap, and for a newly married couple, it was perfect. But from the very first night, Laura swore she felt uneasy, particularly on the staircase. She told Daniel she sometimes felt like someone was watching her as she climbed, a presence pressing on her back, urging her to move faster. Daniel laughed it off as nerves, but Laura's unease only grew. One night, around 2 a.m., Daniel woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the stairwell. At first, he thought Laura had gotten up for water, but when he reached for her, she was still beside him, fast asleep. The footsteps grew louder until they stopped just outside their bedroom door. Daniel held his breath, staring at the handle, waiting for it to turn. But nothing happened. The next morning, when he checked the stairs, he found faint wet footprints leading up from the basement and stopping at the landing. The basement door had been locked all night. Weeks passed, and Laura began seeing something Daniel never did. A woman, pale, gaunt, with stringy hair hanging over her face. Always on the staircase, always staring up at her from below. Sometimes she would appear standing still, sometimes crouched low, clutching the banister with twisted fingers. Laura begged Daniel to move out, but finances kept them stuck. To prove she wasn't imagining it, she took Polaroids of the staircase, and in several of them, faint shadows resembling a figure could be seen, even when no one was there. The breaking point came one night when Laura woke screaming. Daniel turned on the lamp and found her at the foot of the bed, staring wide-eyed at the doorway. She claimed the woman had climbed the stairs and entered their room, standing silently by Daniel's side of the bed, watching him sleep. Laura swore she felt cold fingers brush her arm as the figure turned and vanished back toward the stairs. Daniel, shaken, finally agreed they had to leave. They broke the lease the next morning. Years later, Daniel looked up the history of the townhouse. Decades before, a woman had reportedly fallen down those very stairs, breaking her neck instantly. Neighbors claimed she was often heard crying at night, searching for someone who never came to help. Even today, residents of that unit report the same phenomenon. The sound of footsteps on the stairs, the feeling of being watched, and sometimes, on the darkest nights, the pale outline of a woman waiting halfway up, as if daring them to pass. The midnight visitor. In 2010, a college sophomore named Brian rented a small studio apartment above a convenience store. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were thin, the floorboards creaked, and the neon sign from the store below flashed red light through his blinds at night. But the rent was cheap, and for a broke student, that was enough. After a few weeks, however, Brian began noticing strange things when he came home late from class. His door, which he always locked, would sometimes be ajar. Items like his textbooks or phone charger would be moved, and on one occasion, he found his pillow flipped upside down. At first, he thought he was being paranoid or careless. But one night, after a late study session, Brian unlocked his door and immediately froze. On his kitchen counter was a half-empty soda can, one he hadn't bought. The chair at his small dining table was pulled out slightly, as though someone had just been sitting there. Heart pounding, he grabbed a baseball bat he kept by the door and searched the entire apartment. Nothing. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. Still, something felt wrong. He changed his locks the next morning. For a few days, things seemed normal again, until the knocking began. Always at midnight, soft at first, then louder. Someone knocking slowly, deliberately, on his door. The first time, he called out, but no one answered. The second time, he grabbed his bat and yanked the door open. only to find the hallway empty. On the third night, he ignored it, burying his head under the blankets. But when he woke the next morning, he found a sticky note on his door. In shaky handwriting, it read, "Thanks for letting me stay." Terrified, Brian called the police, who searched the building thoroughly. At first, they found nothing. But in the maintenance closet at the end of the hall, hidden behind a stack of old paint cans, they discovered a sleeping bag, water bottles, and a collection of wrappers. Someone had been living there, watching the tenants, slipping in and out when they weren't home. Though the squatter was never caught, police suspected the person had been entering Brian's apartment through the shared crawlspace above the ceiling tiles. The sticky note was the only trace they left behind. Brian moved out within a week. To this day, he refuses to live anywhere without multiple locks and security cameras. What unsettles him most isn't the soda can, or the knocking, or even the sticky note. It's the thought of how many nights he slept, unaware that someone was standing just beyond his door, waiting for midnight. Man at the edge of the bed. In 1992, a young woman named Melissa rented a small ground-floor apartment after moving to a new city for work. The place was modest but comfortable, a single bedroom, a narrow living room, and a tiny kitchen that opened into the hall. At first, she loved the independence of living alone. But within weeks, she began waking up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. Always around 3 a.m., her heart pounding as if she had been startled from a nightmare she couldn't remember. One night, half asleep, Melissa opened her eyes and swore she saw a figure sitting at the edge of her bed. A man, tall and thin, his head bowed as if he were staring at the floor. Frozen in terror, she blinked, and the figure was gone. She told herself it was sleep paralysis or exhaustion. But the sightings continued. Always the same man, always at the same spot, his posture eerily patient, as if waiting for something. Sometimes she caught the faintest sound of breathing, steady and low, that wasn't hers. Melissa confided in her neighbor, who revealed a chilling detail. The previous tenant of her unit had been a man in his late 30s who vanished under mysterious circumstances. He had been reported missing after failing to show up for work, and the apartment had been left untouched for weeks before Melissa moved in. The police never found him, but rumors swirled that he had been struggling with paranoia in the months before his disappearance, often complaining that someone stood by his bed at night. Determined to prove she wasn't imagining things, Melissa set up a small camera on her nightstand. The first 2 nights showed nothing unusual. On the third, however, when she reviewed the footage, her stomach dropped. For a split second, the recording glitched, and in the frame, she could see a tall shadow sitting at the foot of the bed. No features, no details, just a human-shaped void darker than the room itself. Melissa moved out within days, abandoning most of her belongings. To this day, the unit remains difficult to rent. Tenants complain of restless nights, waking abruptly at 3 a.m., and the overwhelming sensation of someone sitting just inches away, watching. Whether it was a remnant of the man who vanished or something older tied to the apartment, one thing is certain: the figure at the edge of the bed never seems to leave. The voices in the static. In 2005, a truck driver named Alan often drove long overnight routes across the Midwest. To stay awake, he relied on the crackle of late-night AM radio, talk shows, weather updates, and static-filled music stations fading in and out. But on one drive, just past midnight, his radio picked up something different. Through the static, he heard faint voices whispering. At first, he assumed it was 2 overlapping signals, a common glitch on the open road. But the more he listened, the more his skin crawled. The voices weren't random. They were saying his name at first. Alan laughed it off as exhaustion, but the voices persisted on later trips. They never came at the same spot, but always late at night, always when he was alone on dark stretches of highway. Sometimes, the voices would repeat things he had just thought, as if plucking the words straight from his mind. Other times, they whispered warnings: "Don't stop here. Keep driving." On one chilling night, the static sharpened into clarity, and a woman's voice said, "You're not alone in the cab." He pulled over immediately, swinging open the cab doors, but no one was there. Unnerved, Alan started recording the broadcasts on a small cassette player. Most of the tapes came back with nothing but static, but a few contained faint, distorted fragments of voices, enough to send chills down his spine. One tape even captured what sounded like a child's laughter echoing faintly beneath the static, followed by a long, low growl. Alan became obsessed, replaying the recordings over and over, convinced something was trying to reach him. Things escalated one night when he called home on his cell phone. His wife answered, but before she could speak, Alan heard the same static-filled whisper on the line. "She can't hear you." He hung up in terror. The next morning, when he tried again, his wife swore she hadn't answered the call the night before. She had been asleep. Shaken, Alan began refusing certain routes. He eventually quit trucking altogether, saying the voices had started following him even into motel rooms, buzzing faintly through TVs and phones that weren't plugged in. When asked about it years later, Alan still refused to play his last tape for anyone. He said the recording was too clear, too specific. All he would admit was that on the final night he drove, the static didn't just whisper anymore. It spoke plainly, in his own voice, saying words he'll never forget. "I'm already here." The missing tapes. In 2017, a freelance journalist named Claire was working on a documentary about unsolved disappearances and strange encounters across America. She specialized in collecting true but forgotten stories, the ones passed around in whispers, never fully explained. She interviewed families, former tenants, even retired police officers. The cases she gathered sounded eerily familiar. A boy vanishing on a rural road, a college roommate who disappeared from her own apartment, a family terrorized by phone calls from inside their house, and even a woman who swore something waited for her every night at the foot of her bed. As Claire pieced the stories together, she noticed a pattern. Many of the witnesses described the same details: footsteps in the dark, voices and static, the feeling of being watched from the corner of the room. Some claimed to have seen a tall, shadowy figure, never clear, always at the edge of vision. In each story, the figure seemed patient, waiting, almost feeding off the fear it created. The deeper Claire dug, the more she felt she was not just collecting stories, but uncovering something that threaded them together. One night, while reviewing interviews in her small home office, Claire's recorder picked up something she hadn't noticed in real time. Beneath the voice of her latest subject was another sound: low, steady breathing. When she isolated the audio, she heard a faint whisper, "Stop looking." She brushed it off at first as interference, but when she played recordings from earlier interviews, she found the same whisper. Different tapes, different locations, but the same voice, always close, as if it were right beside the microphone. Claire became obsessed. She filled notebooks with timelines, maps, and sketches of what her witnesses described. But in her final entry, she wrote something chilling. "It's not the people who are connected. It's the presence. It's always been here." That night, she called a colleague and left a frantic voicemail, saying she thought someone was inside her house. The message ended abruptly with a sharp static burst, followed by silence. Claire was never heard from again. Weeks later, police searching her home found her office in disarray. Papers covered the walls, strings connecting cases across decades. On her desk were 3 cassette tapes, neatly labeled. But when investigators pressed play, each tape contained only the same thing: hours of static, punctuated by a single phrase repeated in a low, distorted voice: "I'm already here."